Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal. And I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy, who I see way down in the little corner of my screen there. So I'm going to be looking at him during this podcast. Welcome, Bruce.
Hey, David.
How are you doing?
I'm doing all right for sunny for now. Tuesday morning, we've sure had some iffy weather the last little while, eh?
Some spectacular skies out there in the last few days. I've been out. I go for walks often in the U of A experimental farm, and you can see the real vista of the sky even in the middle of the city. It's like being in the just incredible clouds and vistas have been wonderful to behold.
Yeah, I follow a few people who are storm chasers on Twitter, and some of the pictures they send back from various points around Alberta are breathtaking.
There's been lots of anvil clouds, right? Yeah. Lots of scary looking clouds, but and there's often tornadoes that we never hear about, right? Because they happen in the middle of nowhere. That's the most common tornado.
Well, the odds are that they should, just given the general area of the province versus of the populated areas. It's just a statistical
and a good
reality.
Thing. A good statistical fact. So, Bruce, it's the middle of summer, but man, the Cult of Hockey was tearing it up in terms of readership because of I think people they're desperate for any kind of Oilers newsy kind of items. And there was a couple actually this past week. Let's start with the first one, which was came out late last week, actually. Emily Kaplan, who is a writer for ESPN, and she did something really interesting. She looked at the core of what she called locked in talent, young talent in its prime and locked in on contracts.
Right.
And she used that criteria to evaluate the NHL, and the Oilers were number one overall. The best locked in talent, according to this. Emily Kaplan doesn't care. She's not an Oilers fan, right? She doesn't care. She doesn't have an axe to grind against the Oilers, it looks like, because someone who does wouldn't have rated the Oilers number one, I don't think. She came across as just like fair-minded assessment, and the Oilers number one locked in young talent in the entire NHL, which was kind of like, nice to hear that, because nice to remind everyone that in this really grim summer of negativity. So, Bruce, what did she write about? What did she have to say about the Oilers, and what were her criteria exactly?
Her criteria, she said, we only considered players who are 27 or younger. The rankings also factored in length of contracts, the longer the better for young talent, and accounted only for players who are inked for at least the next 3 seasons. For example, New Jersey Devils might look strong at first glance, but Taylor Hall and Nico Hischier are both signed for just 2 more years, leaving a lot up in the air. So, and then when she goes into the top locked-in young cores, number 1, Edmonton Oilers core. Connor.
Hey, just wait a second, Bruce. Before you get into that, let's just talk about our criteria. Let's deal with that first. What did you think of? What do you think of her criteria?
Well, it's I think kind of bogus, frankly. It's great. Players are locked in down the road, but it almost by definition excludes entry-level contract players. Unless they've already inked their renewal on July 1st. So you've got a lot of teams with, players under team control, as the term goes, who maybe have 1 or 2 years to run on their entry-level contract, and then they're almost certain to re-up with that team for several more years. I mean, the team has their rights effectively for 7 years with very rare exceptions. We'll I'm sure get into that in the talking about some of the other teams that might lay claim to Toronto.
Well, when you think about it, Bruce, when you think about her criteria, they were designed like this might actually be the most brilliant trolling job.
Yeah, it was designed
of the summer. Now, Dustin Nielsen was close. Dustin Nielsen had this Twitter poll. TSN, he had this Twitter poll. Who are the best 2 centers in the NHL? And he had McDavid, Draisaitl in one pairing, Malkin, Crosby, and I can't remember the third. Might have been from was it from St. Louis? Anyway, he had 3, and on Twitter poll you can pick 4, but he didn't put Tavares Matthews as a choice even. So that was I love that was like high level trolling. But this, if this, because by her criteria, you have to leave out Matthews and Marner and Nylander, who, come on, they're under Toronto control for the next 4 years, because really. But it also, because of the age cutoff, leaves out Tavares, who is like the youngest. How old is he? 27? 20? No, he's 28, I guess, right?
Yeah,
so he's just on the cusp. Now, I think it's actually fair to leave out Tavares, because I think that contract could work, could bring you a Stanley Cup, but could bring you untold misery as well. Like there's a non-zero chance of bringing untold misery, because is that your dog? Because he's an older, he's heading into his 30s, right? He's heading out of his peak.
Yeah.
And maybe you're going to get 2 or 3 years of John Tavares at a point a game, but then you might reasonably get the rest of the contract at John Tavares at 0.6 points per game or 0.5 points per game. And like Mike Richards, right? Like,
right. Well,
so like a lot of like every like the average NHL player whose production gets cut and has a curve from 25 to 35, just
when you're talking about locked in young cores, I mean, they're looking 3 years down the road. So 27 today is 30 in 3 years. So already you're hitting the pinnacle and maybe beginning the ride down the other side of the hill. I've been watching bike racing. Sorry. It's so her take on number one team, Edmonton Oilers, and she identifies 3 core players, and I'd argue there might be 1 or 2 more. Connor McDavid, center, 21 years old, $12.5 million for 325-26. Leon Draisaitl, 22 years old, $8.5 million through 24-25. And Oscar Klefbom, 24-year-old, $4.2 million through 22-23. So,
and those contracts, Bruce, are only going to look better. Like the Draisaitl contract, so much controversy last summer, controversy through the season. But right now, even though he didn't have a particularly great year, he was down a little bit for a number of reasons. Even then now, but the bet on Draisaitl, right, is he's going through his prime years, right? Like that is a great bet that you've made on a player. And, it's not sometimes young players start out great and fail too. We've seen that too, usually because of injury. But great bet on Draisaitl. There's been all these $9-10 million contracts. His contract's looking more and more reasonable. So, and there's also, if you look at the Oilers, not on the list, not mentioned by her, is Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Darnell Nurse, Adam Larson.
Nurse is locked up, so he's actually.
Oh, he's not locked up.
Yeah, he hasn't re-signed yet. I mean, he might re-sign this week, and he would get added to this list by its criteria. I would argue Adam Larson should be on this list.
Yeah, Nugent-Hopkins is locked up 3 more years, correct?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So there's also Evan Bouchard, who's locked up 3 years. She did mention him by name, and Puljujarvi, who could well turn out Yamamoto. Anyway, lots of teams have players in the kind of Puljujarvi Yamamoto category. I think it's fair to say guys who might turn out but might not really turn out. So
Yamamoto, I mean, we know him as the next Mitch Marner, right?
The next Denny Savard, and Jesse Puljujarvi is the next Blake Wheeler. And Evan Bouchard is the next Larry Murphy. We know these things, Bruce, even if other fans are uncertain of them. We can be certain.
Right.
Sam Gagner was the next Joe Sakic. Gagner was the next Joe Sakic.
She goes on to write, here's her text on this. The Oilers might require some refinement before they ultimately win. No kidding. But it's hard to argue with the core they have drafted and subsequently locked in for the next 5 to 8 years. Then again, it's not exactly high-level managing to commit to a player like McDavid when given the opportunity. However, the pledge to McDavid's sidekick, Draisaitl, is a nice touch, and Klefbom's low cap hit will keep the salary cap at bay for some time, which lands the Oilers here at number 1. And that's before you even mention that the Oilers also just signed their 2018 first-rounder, Evan Bouchard, adding another young asset on the blue line.
So this story is totally weird because it actually has a little bit of love for a move Peter Chiarelli made from an outside hockey writer. So that's just like what got into her. She must be totally insane
The Draisaitl pack. Yeah, well, she's
yeah.
looking to turn more than dollars, I think. But of course, the nitpickers and critics. Let's be kinder. The critics say that Bob Draisaitl has been overpaid. Now, me looking at it, I would rather be paying Leon Draisaitl $8.5 million for the next 7 years than John Tavares $11 million for the next 7 years. But that's just me. And I know this summer, in parsing through the statistics from last year, I'm constantly surprised by how high Draisaitl rates on some things. Like I've seen numbers from the passing project, for instance, where he's just listed in the 98th percentile or something like that in the NHL for delivering passes for scoring chances. If I read this a few days ago, so I might not have it exactly right, but this was, he showed really, really well in some of these percentile groupings of where does he rank in the league as a whole. And the answer is he looks pretty darn good for a guy that's just 22 years old and who, according to some people, played through a tough season and only scored 70 points.
Yeah, and has been an absolute horse in international hockey competition. Was partly responsible, was one of the key players on a Team Euro that went to the final of that bogus tournament I never watched.
Mm-hmm.
And for Team Germany, he's been great. So yeah, I mean, Leon Draisaitl, both you and I really admire this player and think he's a strong two-way center. And I think there's been evidence. Let's not get into McClellan's use of him because that's like we'll just start.
Yeah, well, I think there's work to be done on the two-way part, and I think there's work to be done on the center part, just because I've kind of had him moving around a little bit. But in terms of the package and the skill set of the player, it's very impressive. He's a big man, great on puck control, great on puck delivery, got a decent scoring touch himself, and there's a lot of pride in that player, I think, and I don't want to make the exact comparison because it's not fair, but in the scheme of things in Edmonton, he's to Edmonton what Malkin has been to Pittsburgh. That's how they have to project him going forward.
So next on her list were Nashville, St. Louis, Toronto, and Winnipeg. So it's not like Toronto got total, like her brilliant, her three-dimensional trolling job. Toronto's still high on the list, so the Toronto fans, but yeah, their noses were out of joint. I didn't really pay attention to any of their tweets. You have to kind of block things out because it's just noise.
Well, she had Ryan Johansson, for instance, listed under Nashville, and here's a center who just signed an 8-year contract for $8 million, and a lot of people see that contract as being an overpay as well. But
yes,
the 8-year aspect, I mean, he's under lock and key to Nashville for the foreseeable, and that is the fundamental underpinnings of her post here.
Yeah, it's like having Ole Jokinen locked up for 8 years there, eh?
And she actually, in Toronto, she does include Tavares and Kadri, both of whom are 27. So I guess it was over 27 that she.
She did include Tavares.
Mm-hmm. Tavares and Kadri and Morgan Riley, and that's the guys that rank him number 4. And this is with Marner, Nylander, and Matthews, all under ELC and not yet signed for their extensions.
So Bruce, here's one for you. I'm going to put you on the spot. Bruce, would you trade the Oilers roster for the Leafs roster? Yes or no?
Oh boy. I think overall, Toronto's got in the lead. But would I trade? No, I'm an Oilers fan. I'm pulling for these guys, and so I'm behind my team, and I'm just waiting for them to make the next steps. But if you were just to impartially rank the set of young talent and not do this exclusion of the ELC as has happened here, Toronto's group is impressive.
Is that a yes or a no?
Would I trade them? No, because I'm a fan.
But okay, what if you were partial?
If I were an owner and said I could have your roster for mine, oh boy.
So you give me, for me, it's easy, Bruce. I stick with McDavid because
Yeah,
Austin Matthews is a
I'm there.
fine young hockey player. He's
He is very
really
good.
looking good,
Mhm.
but he's not a sure. He's in the Draisaitl category. Like he's a really good player. He might become this outstanding player. If I was in Toronto, I would be totally. But he's not in McDavid's category. McDavid's in any trade, Bruce. Well, I'm going with the Pollock rule on this potential trade. Best player wins the trade, and I'm going with I'm invoking the Pollock rule, and I'm saying I go with the Oilers because of that, and because the other assets are not unsubstantial in the Oilers, although clearly Toronto's overall depth of really good players is 2 or 3 players deeper than the Oilers. I would say. I think that's a fair comment, but
Yes.
I'm taking the best player in that trade.
Yeah, and I think also if you go right down into the depth of the system, Toronto's got an edge too. They've really been collecting draft choices, and this whole new era under Shanahan and Kyle Dubas, and for a long time Lou Lamoriello, they really turned the corner there from being a pretty mediocre team for a pretty long time to really being one of the NHL's more exciting young up and coming teams.
Well, Bruce, even though they have yet to win a playoff round, don't they rival Sam Pollock for the greatest GM team? Like it's kind of a team effort. The greatest hockey management group ever assembled in the history of the NHL, the Toronto group of managers.
Well, they're getting mighty close. I mean, they won 3 playoff games in each of 2 different seasons now. Yeah. I used to be a Leafs fan way back in the day when they were actually winning cups. I'm an original 6 original myself, and the Leafs were my team way back before the Oilers existed and before I lived here. And so I have a little bit of a soft spot for Toronto, and at the same time, I have sort of a underlying hatred of a lot of the hype that comes out of there. And I truly, like, savagely hated the Leafs of about the 2000 era when they had Curtis Joseph, who they stole from us, right? I mean, that's Oilers fan perspective, obviously. He went to the highest bidder, and it happened to be those guys in Toronto. But they also had Gary Roberts, Shane Corson, Ty Domi, Darcy Tucker. Oh man, that was an easy team to hate. I don't hate the current Leafs team. In fact, I kind of like them. They're exciting. I like the style of hockey they play. More power to them. I mean, if they win the East, that's great. Let's take them out in the Cup Finals. That would be real exciting.
You know what? It's interesting because initially on Twitter, you start to get in contact with other fan bases, and I found that the fan base in Toronto, like a lot of them, were total jackasses. Like, but then some of them are. But then, I started to meet some really sane, interesting fans who are reasonable, like the guys at Leafs Hub and a few other sites. And I thought, I just totally changed my position. And like seeing their like genuine enthusiasm for their team and their lack of antipathy for other teams, their lack of snark, like they kind of won me over. So I have this kind of soft spot for the Leafs and for their fans because of making a connection with some Toronto Maple Leafs fans. So, and I agree with you. And I rooted for the Leafs too. I was a Habs fan as a kid, but when Roger Nielsen was coaching that team, and they had Sittler and Turnbull and McDonald, and they had a couple good playoff seasons, and then they brought it, and I remember they made this big trade for Dan Maloney. I think from the Red Wings, I think they traded Errol Thompson for him, if I'm not mistaken. And Dan Maloney was coming in as going to be the missing piece to put them over the hub. And man, what it reminds me of, Bruce, is the Milan Lucic signing.
Yeah, that's actually reasonable. He's similar, big hulking winger. He really creamed somebody when he caught him in the trolley tracks. But get that guy turning, and you had him beat.
Yeah, unfortunately, and I think
he was a pretty good player, Dan Maloney.
Oh, he was a force.
I wouldn't say he was a great player, but he was a pretty good player, and through most of his 20s, really.
And then his 30s.
His 30s.
Let's not even talk about that. Okay, let's move on to our next topic, Bruce. And that is Patrick Maroon, the former Oilers hockey player, was on Spitting Chicklets, which is a really fun podcast to listen to by Barstool Sports, and it's got former Oiler Ryan Whitney and Paul Bissonnette are two of the main commentators on it. So it was a fascinating interview.
Shrinking Violets Incorporated, eh?
They're more incendiary than I am by like a million miles, which is saying a lot. So they had Maroon on. And it was interesting because he gave his pat answer about leaving Edmonton, which has some truth to it. But then when they dug in deeper, he talked a lot about how difficult it was to be an Edmonton Oiler when the team was losing. So he started out by saying, I didn't really want to get traded out of Edmonton. And then he says, I actually loved it there. I actually liked it. Because he's
noticed the actually.
Yeah, you have to be defensive, right? Like, I guess it's so easy to crap on Edmonton. So he says, the fans are great. I liked it. You know what the most important thing was? The guys were great. Unbelievable guys. You could not have found a better group of guys. But obviously, I got traded for a reason. We weren't winning. And Maroon is bitter about what happened in his contract situation. That's clear. Like, he was clearly expecting a 4-year deal. And when you look at some of the other players who got signed for long-term deals, it's kind of strange that he wasn't seen in the same light. I think St. Louis got a hell of a bargain 1 year at $1.7 million on that guy. Anyway, so he went on and they Bissonnette brought up the incident with McDavid getting heckled at a restaurant. And Bissonnette said if that had been him, he would have put the guy's jaw on the other side of his face. And I think actually, if rumors are true, that's probably happened to a few loudmouth Edmontonians when they've heckled Edmonton Oilers in public. There's been a few dust-ups that the heckler might not have got the best of. Anyway.
Probably not. My odds are on the highly trained professional athlete in any encounter like that.
Yes, who actually also has been in fights and knows how to fight and deals with the stress of it. Anyway, Bissonnette asked, like, being in a Canadian city when the expectations were so high, how did that work out? And Maroon said, it sucks, to be honest with you. And then he went on to say, let me just scroll down here. Then talked about how he'd been shopping with his fiance just before the trade deadline when an older fan came up to him and said, yeah, you're not having a good year like you did last year. And Maroon says, I'm just like, yeah, you're right, I'm not. And then he was just like, I think the team needs to do this and that. And he's just telling me about the team and what they need to do. And my fiance finally looked at him and said, all right, I think your time is up.
That's a beautiful response. I love that. She handled that perfect.
Because people just go like they're like me and you. We go on and on and on. We can talk hockey until the sun sets, the sun comes up, the sun sets again, sun comes up again, sunset. Like, we just go on and on and on. And man, doing that to a player on the team,
it's not fair.
Get your head out of your butt. Anyway, so then Maroon went out and he continues on. Even when you go out to dinner, people come up to you and they try to be the GM, coach, player, and you're just like, man, I would love to see you on the ice. But they're not out there, and I'm out there. It's a hard city to live in, but it's one of those things when you kind of chuckle and you laugh when you go to West Edmonton and people are chirping you about how bad you are and walking around, looking at the casino and the amusement park, and you're like, Jesus, where am I right now? I'm playing hockey in the NHL. And then Whitney actually said something nice about Edmonton.
Yeah.
If you're on a good team in Edmonton, it's incredible. I would have loved to have played there because when they're good, I'm sure that year it was buzzing. Like, you go to Cactus Club, everything is free. But when you're bad, you're trying to park your car and you're getting chirped on how you parallel park. Can't even shut your door the right way. It's like every little single thing you just get shits. You do just get shit on your face. It's like a complete disaster. And we'll just leave it there. We got the gist of it. So Bruce,
Whitney, that was pretty funny about getting chirped for parallel park.
I'm going to give you
That's harsh.
Let's hear your take on it because I've already written about this. What did you think of it all?
Yeah, I think we're treading in dangerous territory there, and I'm not sure that the social media time has really helped the situation either. I really get browned off myself when I see people adding players. You know, they put their actual email or their Twitter handle in a discussion where they're bad mouthing the guy, and that's out of line. And any of this
It's
business,
totally out of line.
any of this
Don't
business
do
of
it.
getting in people's faces. I mean, I'm not sure you just walk past the guy, but I mean, if you look at, make eye contact and smile and nod, maybe even shake hands with a player, whatever, great. But this business of telling them what the management should do, I mean, the player might have his own opinions about what management is doing. I'm sure they do, but they probably have to bite their tongue pretty hard, and just to sit there and hear some, theory that might be good or more likely cockamamie about what needs to be done. I don't think they need that, and I really don't think. I don't see how we're furthering as a community the fortunes of our hockey team if the players say how hard it is to live in our city as under the microscope of the being the big show in town.
How about this? Like, if you see a player in public, like, don't be weird. Like, don't be weird. Just have a friendly. If you're gonna have an interaction, like, just like anyone else, have a friendly human interaction with the player. Just, hi, how's it going? And then that's leave it at that. Move on.
Mm-hmm.
Don't at them on Twitter.
Yeah.
Don't tell them whatever your theories are. Maybe they're the best theories ever. Maybe you're the smartest blogger or Twitterer or whatever on the others. Don't just keep it to yourself in that situation, though. They have enough pressure on them, and they know how the team is going, and they know how they're going. They do, and whatever you say, it's not going to help in the least. It's going to just increase the negative of being in Edmonton, which is getting too much attention, too much negative attention, too much boring people blabbing in your face about the team. Don't do it. Just shut your mouth. Walk away. If you're a kid, the nice thing to do would be like, hey, can I have your autograph? That's fine. If you're an adult, hey, how's it going? And then walk away. Like, unless they want to talk, unless they start bringing up, hey, do you want to know what's going on inside the dressing room? If they say that to you, then say, yeah, that'd be interesting to know. But if they don't say that,
they won't.
Shut your face and walk away. That would be a plan. And
or open your face and a smile.
Yeah, that's another plan. Fair enough, really. Bruce.
I mean, it's their people too, right? I mean, but yeah.
So Bruce, he said something that I thought was actually kind of cool, though, because he talked about the tightness of the team, like the great group of guys. And I think there is something about playing in Edmonton, which can be special for a player. And I think we saw this in the 80s teams, and we've heard it from other teams, like, because I think it is such an intense experience playing here. Mm-hmm. It's as Cal Nichols used to call it, the pure hockey experience, which you can actually sell to people, because everyone's looking for meaning in their lives, to do something valid, and we find it in all kinds of different ways. And one way is like, it's what you do is actually important to other people. It's culturally important. It's significant. Mm-hmm. You win a cup in Anaheim, it's like if you win a cup in Anaheim and nobody sees it, did it actually happen? And in Edmonton, it's hugely significant for the rest of your time in Edmonton. And I think there's a certain amount of the players kind of huddling together in Edmonton, because there's less to do and it's more intense. So you're more in the company of each other, because when you go out in public, you want to be with people, and you need to protect yourself a little bit. So you're kind of pulling in closer together. And that, I think, Maroon alluded to with this great group of guys. I'm sure every hockey team has a great group of guys. Most of them, at least. They all say that. Yeah, but I think he sounded like he truly, there was something kind of special here. And I think being in Edmonton could be part of that specialness, and we don't blow it by being total negative dim bulbs in interactions with players in public. And that tape of Connor McDavid, I don't even think, like, people said that was an Oiler fan. I don't think that was an Oiler fan. That was a 20-something Yahoo showing off for his friends who wasn't a fan and was a jerk. So that's how
it was. Probably about 5 sheets to the wind at the time also.
Yeah. I mean, I have to admit, when I was in my 20s, I heckled players. I have heckled players at games, like in this from the stands. Mm-hmm. And it's not something I would do now. So I get being a 20-something dim bulb and doing something dumb. But at the game, I think it's one thing, right? Like, that's whatever. Like, you pay your money, you get to yell at the game. I think that's part of the
Yeah,
That's
no,
part of the
that's
bargain.
fine.
But I wouldn't do that again.
Within reason.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that again. But I think if someone beside me was doing, I wouldn't tell them to shut up. But if someone was in public and I saw them heckling, I might say, depending on how bad it was, like, shut your face and suffer the consequences of telling a 20-something pepped up, drunk young male to shut his face. But that's what they should do.
Yeah.
Shut your face or smile.
Yeah, just make eye contact and nod. I mean, there's lots of ways to interact without necessarily having to take up someone's attention until their time is up, as Maroon's fiance put it. So I noticed at the end of your post, he says he was getting free meals and he was well loved in 1617, which is, well, the second part is true. I don't know about the free meals, but I believe it. He certainly was a highly popular player here. The following year, things are going bad, and I'm just getting chirped everywhere I go. People are just chirping you the entire time, and you're just like, what the hell is going on? What happened from the year before that I'm doing this year? Just because our team sucks, does that mean I suck too? And I mean,
And he didn't
how
suck.
does that breed? Yeah, like I don't see where the good outcome is from negative feedback like that. And I mean, I imagine with just what I know of these three guys, there may have been a little bit of overstatement about getting chirped all the time, but I mean, I'm sure there's enough of it that filtered through that that was their takeaway, and it just doesn't look good on
It happens. Maybe it happened 5 times, right? Like, who knows? Like, or maybe it happened. That's my bread maker going off. Maybe it happened 50 times. I don't know. But I think if it happens once, that's too much. Like, I write controversial things, Bruce, and like on hotly debated issues, right? Like things that are, and I can't. If I was out with my family and kids and I got like that happen, that would be so upsetting. Like, honestly, to have someone say what they would normally say to me on Twitter, which is fine on Twitter, like, speak your mind, man. That's why we're there. But in public, you should just give people their space, like, be respectful and don't say anything to anyone like that. That's what I think. I just think it's beyond the pale. Hey, Bruce, we were both relieved with Maroon, because you brought this up. Like, he didn't say, yeah, it was terrible going on Twitter or reading the Cult of Hockey game grades, because that was a possibility, right? Because that is part of the noise. And you know what I would say about that, and this is maybe this is to some degree entirely self-interested, but I also think it's good advice. Like, and in this, I've said this repeatedly, is like, for a player, don't read the Cult of Hockey. And don't listen to talk radio. Don't read any blogs. Don't read the newspaper. Don't listen, like, in whatever NHL city you're in. Don't do it, because we are fans talking about our team. And this really is part of I think the things that fans should be allowed to engage in is talk about their team. It's why you're paid $1.7 million a year in St. Louis, because there's such interest. So of course people are going to talk about it. Yeah. So this is something that you can avoid easily. Is social media, and you don't have to read the Cult of Hockey, that's for sure. Now, of course, players will, the problem is their friends will come up to them and say, did you see what that guy wrote in the Cult of Hockey? And that is a problem, and that's real. And I guess the player needs to tell his family, like, whatever people say, please don't tell me. Like, I don't want to know, because it's just BS. Like, I don't need to hear it.
I can tell you as a writer that when I'm writing a game grade, for instance, on Patrick Maroon, for example, I don't expect him to read it and respond to any criticism that might be in there. I'm writing for other fans that have seen the game, maybe haven't seen the game, want to know what the player's contribution is. And I try and make the point of, when I do make criticism, even snarky criticism at times, it's criticizing the performance as opposed to some kind of explicit criticism of the player in person.
Yeah.
How did they do in this game? What was their impact on the game, and to parse it that way as the play, not the player.
We both shy away, I think, as a general rule, from making personal comments about anything about the player. And I do it because I don't actually believe that it takes high character to win a hockey game. I think it takes high skill, and it takes it takes certain attitudes within the game itself. But these aren't, I don't think they're actually related to the person's character. I think you could have really weak character and be a huge contributor to a Stanley Cup championship team. So like in that sense, like the real personal sense of who an individual is, you can perform under pressure, a kind of a manual activity, which is with a great amount of skill, and still be a total a-hole. Like, and I don't think they're related at all, actually. So I don't get into their characters. I don't think it has anything to do with winning or losing or performance on the ice. You could also be the greatest person on earth and not be able to play hockey, like, or be a weak player or fold in the, not perform well in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Character doesn't matter to me. I think it's like one of these things that are, maybe it's just misunderstood. Like maybe they're talking about character of a certain kind, like the ability that helps you perform under pressure and keep focused and execute a difficult physical activity when millions of people are watching and there's millions of dollars riding on it. But maybe that's what they mean by character. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's such a nebulous term. I mean, character, you want to have, willpower and all these good kind of things in your room. But you know what I want most? Goaltending.
Do you have to have like high moral character to be a good goaltender? I don't think you need to be able to execute under pressure.
I don't think so. I've seen a few goalies in my day that I didn't really think high of as individual folks. But
I kind of look at it like being a plumber, Bruce, or like an actual plumber or like a tradesman. Like you're doing a physical job, which takes a lot of skill to do it right and a lot of knowledge, but it doesn't. It takes the character of applying yourself to that job and sticking with the job and doing it right. And so having those kind of values, I guess, but it doesn't take like high character to be a great plumber. You could be low character, high character. It's just not really related to that. So that's how I see like hockey. It's essentially a form of like it's a physical manual thing. So I don't see really how character.
So you're not trying to win the Marc Messier Leadership Award here, then?
Well, yeah, like I don't, Mark within the dressing room, like I don't know, like it just, it's like you say, it's fun. I don't think I'm articulating this necessarily very well. Maybe I will as I work on it, as I work on my argument. Hopefully, I'll get better at expressing what exactly I am trying to say here. But the plumber analogy actually comes from Bill Veeck, the old Chicago White Sox owner, and that's how he described it once. Like, these guys aren't heroes. They're just like think of 20 guys who would be plumbers. That's who these guys are, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. That's really cool. Like there's being a good plumber. If you've had a good plumber, you know how cool that is, right? Come to your house. That's the coolest thing when you need it. But that's what it is. So don't ascribe heroism or high character or all these other things to this thing, which is actually at its base, it's kind of a form of manual work. So there you go.
What's really valuable is a good plumber on a value contract.
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, Bill Veeck. I read his 2 autobiographies, and oh, great, what a character that guy was. Anyway, it's all narrative, eh? And so much of, writers write narrative, so that's sort of the background from which all the stuff has come. That some of the modern analytics is kind of a wind from a different direction, and there's some clashes there. I value narrative to a degree, and overall, any hockey game kind of writes its own narrative, but there's ways of looking at it and analyzing it. Some of these tried and true sort of hoary cliche types, it doesn't hurt to tone some of that stuff down a little bit.
I guess the one difference in thinking about my own analogy between plumbing and this is I do think this takes, like, to be a hockey player takes physical courage, right? So it does take a kind of willingness to risk yourself for the good of the team, risk your personal health. So there is there is courage involved. And I'm not going to underestimate that and underrate that. That's a very real thing. And these guys have way more physical courage than I have. That's for damn sure. Like they're just wired to do these things like that. And that it's so impressive that kind of guts to go for it like that. There's a qualifier.
And that's true in a lot of athletics and other physical endeavors. And to go back to the bike racing I watched this morning, you look at bike racing, you say, that's not a contact sport, but just wait until you see the guy skid out going around a hairpin on the downhill like one did this morning leading the race, hit the retaining wall and go flying over it and down into a gully, and get up, climb out of the gully, climb back on his bike and carry on down the hill. Now that's courage.
Yes. Yeah. So I guess what
even.
Yes. High character, high moral. So I guess from my perspective, like, yes, we focus on these Oilers as in our writing, but I think it is actually part of what brings players money. And it is actually part of what you have to put up. I mean, the one way of looking at the heckling, though, even in public, Bruce, is like you play the hockey for free and you get paid $3.5 million a year to be heckled now and then in public. But I think that is kind of outside the parameter of acceptable fan behavior. Whereas even complaining bitterly on Twitter about a player is different than that and is okay. I think that's acceptable to do. Whereas in public, in someone's face, that is unacceptable. And to the extent that we have a higher percentage of that going on in Edmonton, we're making Edmonton it difficult for the Edmonton Oilers to compete. And we have a role in the Oilers being able to compete. And we can either be a positive force by being really positive and rooting like hell at games and singing "Oh Canada" when he holds up the mic and we know all the words, and singing the Star Spangled Banner and impressing players and Americans by doing that and being friendly to players. But we can be negative by getting in their faces when things are going bad. So,
yeah, well, I think some of this is having its impact on the game in the sense that the markets that have the fair weather fans that will climb on board when the team is doing well and then just disappear when it isn't. I can see why that would have appeal to the players, where when the team they can play in relative anonymity, and when things are not going quite so well, they're not subject to the same kind of scrutiny, and yet when they succeed, they're going to have just as big a parade in Anaheim, as you mentioned earlier, as they might in Edmonton for all we know. And I think if you look at the records of the Canadian markets over the last couple of decades, and you look at that long now 25-year, quarter-century drought since the Stanley Cup has resided in our country, that may be a contributing factor to the equation. I mean, so many of these star players, with the exception of John Tavares, to throw a bouquet in his direction, when they get the chance, they will sign with a team that's stateside and oftentimes outside of natural hockey country.
Yeah. So like the one other thought I have about all this is like no matter what we say, it doesn't make any difference, but I really don't. And I think that's largely true. But I do think if we start to talk about this as fans and set rules, like on Twitter, if you see someone at a player, if then that person says, hey, if it's a negative comment, like a positive at, fine, right? Mm-hmm. That's different. But if you see someone negatively adding players with their criticism or if other people on Twitter say, hey, don't do that. Like, I mean, I'm not saying Twitter mob the guy. Don't tell him he's beyond the pale and, whatever. Just say, just think about that. Don't do that. That's a bad idea. And don't at the player as you're having that conversation either. Like, well, although the player might like to hear that, but just we can take small steps to start to create a culture of just letting people be when they need some downtime and not getting in their faces. So I do think if we own up to what's going on. And so I give Maroon credit for, in a pretty fair and non-angry, friendly way, telling it like it is.
Yep. Don't at a player, subtweet him instead.
That's right. That's what we do, man. We're totally, when you write stuff, let me ask you something. Let's end with this because we've been going on here, but when you write something, do you want the coach, the GM, or do you ever have a thought like the coach, GM, or player should read this? It would be good if they read this, and I want them to read this. Like completely honest here, like
Yeah.
you've taken the truth serum.
Mm-hmm. Most of it, no. Sometimes there's a specific observation which I think has value. That's enough from an outside that might be enough of a different viewpoint that might be worth the attention. But a lot of the uh, ins and outs are stuff they know like the back of their hand. And a lot of the statistical stuff, especially in the game grades when I talk about who had the most hits or shots or whatever on the team, that's almost superfluous information to them, and that they're getting it from elsewhere for sure. Uh, just more of the sort of outside, offhand observation of a player's tendencies sometimes, or something of that nature, something that I've noticed, say, more than once, and I finally come around to commenting on it. Well, I hope somebody reads this and thinks about it, and whether it's the player or whether it's just somebody that is in position to. But that's, I would say, certainly a minority of what I write. Like I say, I'm writing for the fans. I'm a fan writing for other fans.
Yeah, I think when I was younger, like you're even as like starting out as a blogger, I might have thought more about wanting to have my say, like if the GM might read it or the coach might read it, and I just think now when I think about how just by its very nature the work we do is negative. Like we focus on the positive, but we also focus on the negative. But that mix of positive and negative is too negative overall to be useful. It's just too critical overall. It's just too critical a mindset. And my preference would be that none of them read any of it ever as a general rule. But I must sometimes, you're right. Like sometimes when I write something about coaching or GM, almost never about the players, but about sometimes about the coaching stuff or about the GM, I would have a thought like, yeah, I wish I could talk to McClellan, or I wish I could say this to him. I do have that thought now and then. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. And I would, as a journalist, love the opportunity to interview McClellan or Chiarelli. And I've asked for those interviews in the past. And in the past, I've had interviews like that. I had a long interview a couple years ago with McTavish, like an hour-long interview. Sweet. And it was fantastic to be able to ask all those questions. But the Oilers as an organization have a policy where they don't allow bloggers to. They don't give us time. They we can't get accreditation at the press conference, and they don't. Honestly, the mainstream media reporters, unless you're in business with the team, you don't get those long sit downs or regular sit downs unless you're like Bob Stauffer, who actually works for the Oilers organization. So he's part of that group. Or sometimes I think there's a bit more openness to broadcasters who are working for companies, TV companies that are in business with the NHL. They'll get that. The rights holders, they'll get rights holders' rights. But even so, it's not just bloggers getting shut out. It's the whole, the radio, TV, and unaffiliated newspaper guys who don't get the access they used to get either. So it's really tightened up in terms of that. And I think that's a shame. I mean, I would love it if they had like a press conference, once a year press conference for bloggers, where we could actually come in or whatever, send questions on Twitter and ask the questions we want to ask. I think that would be great PR for the Oilers, but they don't see it that way. So.
Yeah, well, I think some of it, the negativity has a feedback loop, and unfortunately, the losing also has a feedback loop. I mean, how easy is it to write 5 positive comments for every negative one, like the psychologists say you should do? When your team has made the playoffs once in 12 years, I mean, there's going to be negative comments to be made, and we all make them. Try to be fair with it, but hey, it's in Edmonton, they've had a hard rule against bloggers for a long time, and there's a couple of incidents in the past, and
someone was tweeting out snarky comments from the press box, like the kind of comments a blogger would make in a mainstream reporter wouldn't make. And they were there as a, I think they were there as a mainstream reporter, and they got the boot because of their snark. And you know, it's like, it's not, it's their business, the Oilers, right? Like they run that, it's their venue. They, you know, they don't have, in theory, I guess, do they have to let anyone in? Like they don't have to give anyone a press pass if they don't want. I don't know. The NHL says they do, but if the NHL says no, we're not, no press passes anymore. I think they would be within their
they'd be cutting
legal
off
rights to do so, Bruce.
They want publicity for their team, but they want to control it, and it's a slippery slope.
It's getting more and more control. Like it's you know, the news all comes out through
their own website. A lot
Bob
of
Stauffer on Oilers Now, and through people who get leaked, a few reporters who get leaked that information, which is fine. But yeah, if sometimes those reporters, their noses get out of joint, because then I report what they say. Well, what do you think I'm going to do? I'm a fan. I'm going to comment on the news. Like, duh. Mm-hmm. So anyway, it's actually, I'm okay with all of this, because I think because of the internet, every fan who wants to have his say to other fans can have their say and can comment on the news, can report on it, can do whatever they want with it. And so there's way more variety of opinion than there used to be when there was no internet. But the team is trying to monetize, be the main source of internet news. They're trying to control all the news in a way they never did before. But you know, the world changes, so got to roll with it.
Yeah, well, you know, in the 80s, we had a reputation of being a knowledgeable fan base. And, you know, I considered myself a knowledgeable fan, went to every game. But you know what? I didn't talk to every person in the building. There's a very few people within range. Nowadays, you can talk to almost anyone who wants to. You know, you get on Twitter or in comment sections or what have you, and you can really hash out ideas and observations to a much more extensive degree than typically would happen in the 80s. I think probably we understand the game a little better, but there's a price to be paid for some of it.
Yeah, you can get on Twitter and find a like-minded group of fans, or fans that, and form a little group and talk. It's fun. And if you find the other fans on Twitter annoying, you can mute them. I mean, it's actually, if you use it properly, it can be a pretty pleasant experience, you know, where you're only talking to who you want to talk to, and you're having a fun experience talking to them. I think if it's social media and you're keeping it social, it's great. Yeah, that's right. Some people, I know you talk to everybody, so that's fantastic. You're I
have a policy, no blocking.
So, for you, man.
Well, sometimes I don't read everything that I see on my timeline. Let's put it that way. But I like to know the range of opinions that are out there. As a fan, I mean, I don't want to just talk to one little subgroup. It's not just the Republicans that voted for me that I get 100% of my attention, right? It's the entire landscape, and that includes, so.
My policy is to mute, generally speaking, but I find if people start to exhibit malice, what I see as malice towards me, malicious comments, and are looking at what I'm saying so they can make their malicious comments, I feel like I'm going to make it a little bit harder for you. You know, you're going to have to work to spread. If you're that mad at me, I'm not going to help you out by giving you a steady stream so you can make malicious comments about me. So that's how I see it. Alrighty, let's leave it there, Bruce, and we'll be back sometime.
Maybe summertime.
Yeah, sometime in the summertime.
At least once a week, eh?
Yeah. Thanks again for talking, Bruce.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.